My distant relative left me $1 million. But what I discovered after changed everything. I never thought a single envelope could change my life or unravel everything I thought I knew about my family. That's how I started my journal entry the night it happened before everything turned upside down. But let me take you back to that morning. It was an ordinary Thursday in Chicago. Cold and gray, the kind of day where the city feels half asleep. I was sitting in my small apartment, half-heartedly working on a freelance graphic design project while drinking my third cup of instant coffee. My rent was due in 6 days, my account balance was hovering dangerously close to zero, and my client had just asked for one more revision, which meant I was getting paid late again. You know that feeling when you're not exactly drowning, but your toes are touching the bottom and you can't quite breathe right? That was my life. So when the knock came on the door, I wasn't expecting anything. No one ever really visited me. My friends texted, my clients emailed, and my landlord just posted reminders under the door. It was a mail courier wearing one of those winter hats with ear flaps and a tired look. Delivery for Ava Mitchell? Yeah, that's me. He handed me a thick envelope, the kind that looks like it belongs in an old courtroom movie. It was heavy, cream-colored, sealed with wax, like something out of the 1800s, and it had an embossed logo that read, Whitmore Sons Legal Services. At first, I thought it was junk mail. Then I noticed the return address Charleston, South Carolina. I'd never been there in my life. I almost tossed it aside, but something about the weight of it made me curious. I sat down, slid a butter knife under the wax seal, and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of thick paper and a business card. The paper was formal, typed neatly with black ink. Dear Miss Mitchell, we are writing to inform you that Miss Eleanor Whitmore has passed away as of last month. In her final will and testament, she has named you as a beneficiary. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience regarding the execution of her estate. Sincerely, Harold Bennett, ESQ, Whitmore Sons, Legal Services. I stared at it for a full minute. The name Eleanor Whitmore rang a faint bell. My mom used to mention someone by that name when I was little. I remembered overhearing things like Aunt Eleanor's being dramatic again, or your great aunt never forgave your grandma for that mess. But it was always vague, distant family drama I never really understood. A distant relative, a will, a letter that didn't seem real. I actually laughed out loud because this sounded exactly like a scam. One of those, you've inherited a fortune from your long-lost cousin in Europe, so things. Still, the lawyer's name looked legit. I googled Whitmore Sons Legal Services, and sure enough, it existed. A real firm, real website, real office. And real obituary listings confirmed. Eleanor Whitmore had passed away 2 months ago. I remember sitting back in my chair, the laptop light flickering on my face, and whispering to myself, what the hell is happening? The next few days were a blur of phone calls and disbelief. When I called the firm, a calm voice answered. Whitmore Sons. This is Harold Bennett speaking. Hi, this is Ava Mitchell. I received a letter about an inheritance. There was a pause. Miss Mitchell, yes, I've been expecting your call. You were named in Miss Whitmore's final will. Okay, but why me? I didn't even know her. I understand your confusion, he said. You were listed specifically by name. Miss Whitmore had no surviving children or siblings. She mentioned you as her closest kin who deserved what was once lost. That phrasing gave me chills. I tried to process it logically. Maybe she'd mistaken me for someone else. Maybe it was a clerical error. But the lawyer confirmed my full name, date of birth, and even my mother's name. It was me. He asked if I could travel to Charleston to finalize paperwork and review the estate's details. He said there would be substantial matters to discuss in person. I didn't have the money to fly, but after some persuasion, he offered to cover travel expenses from the estate's funds. That's when it hit me. This wasn't some scam. This was real. I arrived in Charleston on a foggy Sunday afternoon. The air smelled like rain and salt, and the town felt like something out of an old novel. Cobblestone streets, sprawling oaks, and houses that whispered stories when the wind passed through. Mr. Bennett met me at the station. He was in his 60s, tall, polite, wearing a perfectly pressed gray suit and the kind of glasses that made him look permanently unimpressed. A pleasure to meet you, Miss Mitchell, he said, shaking my hand. You look quite like your mother. That startled me. You knew her? He smiled faintly, only through Eleanor's stories. She spoke of her often. We drove for about 20 minutes until we reached the outskirts of town. Then the trees parted, and there it was, the Whitmore estate. I don't know what I expected. Maybe something small or run down, but this wasn't that. The mansion stood tall and lonely on a hill overlooking the coastline. Its windows tall and arched, its white paint chipped from years of neglect. It was eerie and breathtaking all at once. The iron gate creaked as we entered. The gravel crunched beneath our feet. This property is part of the estate, Mr. Bennett said. It will transfer to you upon completion of the paperwork. I stopped walking. Wait, the house? He nodded. And the funds? Miss Whitmore's accounts total approximately $1 million. I don't even remember breathing after that. My mind just blanked. $1 million. From a woman I'd never really met. I must have looked pale because Mr. Bennett gave a reassuring nod. I understand it's overwhelming. Miss Whitmore's estate was modest in size, but significant in value. You were her only named heir. The house was silent when we stepped inside, except for the echo of our footsteps. Dust motes drifted through the light from the tall windows. Every piece of furniture looked antique, carefully chosen but forgotten over time. The air smelled faintly of old paper and lavender. In the main hall, a massive portrait hung above the staircase, a stern-looking woman with silver hair and intelligent eyes. "That's her," I whispered. "Indeed, Eleanor Whitmore, 1939 to 2024. Her painted gaze seemed to follow me as I moved. Mr. Bennett guided me into the study, dark wood. Shelves full of old books, a grand desk with yellowed papers neatly stacked. He opened a folder and laid out the will. Miss Whitmore made it clear that this inheritance is unconditional. No stipulations, no trusts, no deferred clauses. Everything she owned passes directly to you. Why me, though?" I asked quietly. "I didn't even know her." He hesitated. "There is a personal note." He handed me a sealed envelope labeled simply, "For Ava." My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a single handwritten line. "To Ava, the only one who might understand why I did what I did. Eleanor." That was it. No explanation, no details. Just that. I stared at the paper for a long time. I didn't understand a word of it, but something about the way she wrote, careful, deliberate, regretful, made my chest tighten. Mr. Bennett cleared his throat gently. "You may stay here as long as you like to settle in. The estate needs inventorying. I'll return tomorrow with final documents." I nodded, dazed, and he left. Then I was alone in a dead woman's mansion, holding a letter that made no sense, surrounded by echoes of a family I never really knew. That night, I didn't sleep much. The house creaked like it was breathing. The wind outside howled through the cracks. I wandered through the halls with a flashlight, my steps soft against the dusty floorboards. There were photographs everywhere, black and white ones of people at garden parties, weddings, children on swings, and in a few of them I saw my mother. She was younger, maybe 20, standing beside Eleanor. They looked happy, sisters almost, but I remembered how my mom never spoke about her. When I asked as a kid, she always said, "Some family wounds don't heal, Ava. It's better to leave them closed." I used to think she meant arguments, but now I wasn't so sure. I stopped at a locked door at the end of the hall. The knob wouldn't turn, but I could see light through the crack, faint, like someone had left a lamp on inside. My pulse jumped, but when I pressed my ear to the door, it was silent. I backed away slowly, deciding not to test my luck on the first night. I sat on the grand staircase, staring at Eleanor's portrait again. I couldn't shake the feeling that her eyes held something. Guilt? Maybe, or sadness? Why me? Why not someone else? I thought about the $1 million, about my student loans, about my empty fridge back in Chicago, about how I'd been struggling for years just to feel stable. It would be easy to just take the money and move on. But that letter, the only one who might understand why I did what I did, what did she mean? The next morning, I made coffee in the dusty kitchen. Surprisingly, the machine still worked, and walked outside to the veranda. The ocean stretched endlessly ahead, gray-blue and calm. The air tasted like salt and ghosts. A man was fixing the fence near the garden, mid-30s, tan skin, work gloves, quiet posture. When he noticed me, he gave a small nod. "Morning, ma'am. You must be Miss Mitchell." "Yeah," I said, clutching my mug. "And you are?" "Daniel. I used to work here. Groundskeeper. Miss Whitmore asked me to stay on till the estate's transition." He spoke politely, but there was something in his tone, something guarded, like he was measuring me. She mentioned me?" I asked. He nodded. "Said you might come one day. Didn't think she meant like this, though." I hesitated. What was she like? I mean, I barely remember her. Daniel leaned on the fence post. "Complicated. Kind when she wanted to be. Private, always. Loved this place more than people, I think." He smiled faintly. "But she had a good heart, even if it was buried under too much regret." That word again, regret. Something told me Eleanor's past was more tangled than I'd imagined. As I looked back at the mansion, sunlight cutting across its faded walls, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about money. This was about why. And somehow, I knew I wasn't going to leave until I found out. That night, I sat at Eleanor's desk, running my fingers over the grain of the old wood. The faint scent of her perfume lingered lilac and paper. I opened the drawer to put away her letter, and something clicked a false bottom. I pried it open carefully and found a small, leather-bound notebook. The first page read, "If anyone finds this, I hope it's someone who still believes in forgiveness." My hands trembled as I turned the page. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. The next line made my breath catch. "This inheritance isn't just money. It's the truth I never told your mother." And that's when I knew this wasn't just a gift. It was the beginning of a confession. And I was the only one left to hear it. Money wasn't the mystery the house was. That was the first thought that hit me the next morning when I woke up in Eleanor Whitmore's mansion. Sunlight spilling through those tall, curtainless windows. I had $1 million tied to a woman I barely remembered. But it wasn't the money that haunted me. It was this house, this enormous echoing place that felt alive in ways I couldn't explain. Every corner whispered. Every hallway seemed to breathe. It wasn't haunted, not in the ghostly sense. It was haunted by memory. After reading the first page of Eleanor's journal, the night before the one that said, "This inheritance isn't just money. It's the truth I never told your mother." I didn't sleep. I just kept thinking, what truth? I'd grown up believing my mother had no one after my grandparents died, that she was alone until she met my dad. But that note, that journal, the photos in the hallway, showing her smiling beside Eleanor, they told a different story. The next morning, I walked down the grand staircase, barefoot, coffee mug in hand, trying to convince myself this was real life and not some elaborate dream. Daniel, the caretaker I'd met the day before, was already outside trimming overgrown hedges near the fence line. He was one of those people who look naturally calm, like nothing really surprised him. When he saw me, he gave that same small nod. "Morning," I called out. He looked up. "Sleep all right?" "Define all right," I said with a weak smile. "Your boss's ghost might have kept me up a bit." He chuckled. "She'd probably like that. Kept people on edge even when she was alive." That made me laugh for real. "So you worked for her long?" He set down the clippers. "Almost 10 years. Mostly maintenance. She liked her privacy, but she wasn't bad company. She used to sit on that porch and talk about the ocean for hours." He motioned toward the sea beyond the hill, waves rolling slowly under a pale blue sky. There was something peaceful about the way he said it, like he missed her, but not in a sad way. More like someone who'd come to terms with loss. I hesitated before asking, "Did she ever talk about my family, my mother?" His expression shifted just slightly. "Sometimes, not much. Said there were things she wished she'd done differently." "Things?" He shrugged. "You'd probably find more answers in that house than I ever could." He wasn't wrong. By midday, I decided to explore the place properly. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Maybe a clue, a memory, a sign that explained why I was here. The mansion was bigger than I'd realized. 4 floors if you counted the attic. Each room had its own theme, its own ghost of Eleanor's personality. The library smelled like tobacco and lemon polish. The dining hall was lined with dusty china that looked like it hadn't seen a meal in decades. There was even a conservatory filled with dying plants still reaching toward the light. And then there was the locked door at the end of the upstairs hallway, the one I'd seen glowing faintly on my first night. That door called to me. I'd tried it before, no luck. But now, armed with curiosity and a hairpin I bent into shape, I decided to try again. The lock was old, the kind that wasn't meant to outsmart modern determination. After a few tries, I heard the faint click. The door creaked open slowly, releasing a faint gust of air that smelled like cedar, paper, and dust. The room inside wasn't like the rest of the mansion. It was smaller, warmer, a study, maybe, or a private office. A large desk stood near the window, covered in neatly stacked papers. Shelves lined the walls, filled with binders, old letters, and photo albums. There was a single frame picture on the desk, 2 young women in their 20s smiling, carefree. One of them was my mother. The other was Eleanor. I froze. They looked so close, like sisters. My mom's arm was slung around Eleanor's shoulders and they were laughing at something outside the frame. I'd never seen my mother look that happy in a photograph. Underneath the frame was a folded letter, yellowed with age, addressed to Marianne, my mother's name. My throat went dry as I unfolded it. "Dear Marianne, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't bring myself to face you again. I wish I could undo what I did. You deserve so much better. I told myself it was fairness, but it was selfishness. And now, it's too late to fix. You once told me that family isn't blood, it's the people who stay. I didn't stay. I walked away when you needed me most. Please forgive me. Eleanor." I must have read that letter 10 times trying to piece it together. What did she do? What did she mean by fairness? Then I remembered the lawyer's words. She had no surviving siblings. But this letter and the photos said otherwise. I flipped through more drawers and found old photographs, postcards, and receipts from decades ago. The more I looked, the clearer it became. Eleanor hadn't just known my mother. She'd raised her for part of her life. There were photos of them at the beach, baking together, decorating a Christmas tree. Then suddenly, the photos stopped around the time my mom would have been 20. No more after that. Something had broken between them, and that something was at the root of everything. By afternoon, I sat on the floor surrounded by paper, letters, and memories that didn't belong to me but somehow felt like mine. The sunlight dimmed slowly and the house started whispering again. Wood settling, wind sighing through cracks. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I jumped, turning fast. Daniel stood at the doorway, holding a tray. "Didn't mean to scare you. Thought you might be hungry." He had brought soup and a sandwich, both steaming. I hadn't eaten all day. "Thanks," I said, sitting back. "You didn't have to." He set the tray down gently. "You've been up here for hours. Figured you might get lost in the past if someone didn't drag you out." I laughed a little. "Too late. I'm knee-deep in ghosts." He looked around at the photos and letters scattered everywhere. "You found her study? So that's what this is?" He nodded. "No one's been in here since she passed. I kept it locked because she asked me to." "Why?" "She said, when the right person comes, they'll open it themselves." That sentence sent chills up my arms. "Daniel," I asked carefully, "what do you know about her and my mother?" He sighed, taking a seat by the window. "I didn't know much, just that your mom used to live here when she was young. Something happened. I think it was about money, maybe betrayal. She stopped coming after that." He looked at me. Eleanor carried that guilt till the end. I wanted to ask more, but I could see in his face he didn't know details, only fragments. After he left, I picked up the journal I'd found the night before. There were dozens of entries, written over the span of years. Most were daily notes, gardening updates, recipes, reflections, but one dated July 12th, 1994 caught my eye. "Marianne left today. She said she can't forgive me. Maybe she's right. I stole what was hers and now I can't give it back. I thought I was protecting her, but I was protecting myself. Mother would have hated me for it. If she ever finds out the truth, she'll never speak to me again. Maybe that's what I deserve." My stomach dropped. She stole something from my mother. Was it money? Property? The same inheritance that she was now passing to me? I flipped ahead. Another entry, a few months later. "I tried to call her. She won't answer. I sent her the necklace, the one father gave us when we were children. It came back unopened. Sometimes I think blood isn't family. It's a curse that binds us even when we try to escape. That last line felt too familiar, like an echo of something my mother used to say. Suddenly, the $1,000,000 felt heavier. What if this inheritance wasn't generosity but atonement? That evening, as the sky turned orange and the sea roared below, I sat outside with Daniel. He had brought 2 mugs of coffee and we watched the sun sink behind the horizon. You ever think about leaving this place? I asked. He smiled faintly. All the time. But then I remember it's the only home I've ever known. She must have trusted you a lot, I said. He shrugged. She did. But she didn't talk about herself much. I think she was trying to make peace with something before she died. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the waves. The wind carried that same faint smell of lavender from the house, her scent still clinging to the wood. Finally, I asked, do you think some people can make things right after they're gone? Daniel looked thoughtful. Maybe not right exactly, but maybe they can leave the door open for someone else to finish what they couldn't. That hit me harder than I expected, because that's exactly what it felt like Eleanor had left me a door, and now it was open. Later that night, I returned to the study. I wanted to understand more. I pulled out another drawer from her desk and found an envelope labeled Legal Correspondence, 1983. Inside were letters from a law firm about a will dispute. It looked like Eleanor and my grandmother had fought over an inheritance years ago. The documents were hard to follow, but it seemed that my grandmother intended to leave equal shares to her 2 daughters, Eleanor and Marianne. Except, somehow, only Eleanor received it. A clerical error, the letter said, but the notes scribbled in Eleanor's handwriting beside it told a different story. I told them not to correct it. I told them she didn't need it, that I'd take care of her. God forgive me. I felt sick, so that was it. Eleanor had stolen my mother's inheritance, their parents' money, and lived with that guilt for the rest of her life. Now she'd passed the wealth down to me, maybe to make it right. I didn't know whether to feel angry or sorry. She'd wronged my mother, but she'd also punished herself for decades. And somehow, I was caught in the middle, the living reminder of both. When I went downstairs for water later, I saw Daniel by the fireplace repairing a broken clock. He looked up as I entered. You're still awake? He asked. Couldn't sleep, I said. Too many ghosts. He gave a soft smile. They don't mean you harm. Maybe, but they're loud. I sat across from him, holding the glass. Daniel, if someone did something terrible a long time ago but tried to fix it, in the end, do you think they deserve forgiveness? He looked into the fire. Depends. Are they fixing it for the right reasons or just to feel better about themselves? I hesitated. What if it's both? He nodded slowly. Then I think forgiveness is possible, but it's not something you give for free. You have to understand the pain first. His words lingered long after he went to bed. Because that's exactly what I was doing, trying to understand the pain behind Eleanor's choices. Before I went upstairs, I stopped by the study one last time. I stood there, surrounded by her words, her regrets, her ghosts, and felt something shift. Maybe she hadn't meant to burden me. Maybe she'd meant to trust me with her truth. On the desk, beneath the pile of notes, I found another scrap of paper. It was the last line of an unfinished letter. Maybe one day, she'll know that I didn't steal out of greed, I stole out of fear. Fear of what? I didn't know yet. But one thing was clear. This house wasn't just filled with memories. It was filled with secrets. And I was the only one left to uncover them. You ever feel like the ground shifts beneath your feet? Not in a dramatic earthquake way, but in that slow, gut-sinking realization that everything you've been standing on might not have been solid to begin with? That's exactly how I felt that morning in Eleanor's study. The house was quieter than usual. Even the creaks seemed hesitant, like they didn't want to interrupt what was about to unfold. Outside, the sea fog had rolled in heavy, swallowing the garden and the cliffside view entirely. I sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by piles of yellowed envelopes, half-burnt candles, and the faint smell of old perfume clinging to the pages. Eleanor's handwriting was neat, painfully so. Each loop and curve felt deliberate, like every word was meant to last forever. And the letter I was holding was addressed to my mother, to Clara, whom I loved, failed, and could never face again. The first line alone hit like a gut punch. I took a shaky breath and kept reading, the words tumbling into my mind faster than I could process them. I stole from you, from both us. When our grandmother died, she left everything to us equally. But I, God help me, I took what wasn't mine. I thought I deserved it more because I was the one who stayed, who took care of her in her last years. But greed is a poison, and I drank every drop. By the time I realized what I'd done, it was too late. You'd moved on, you'd started your family, your little girl, and I couldn't bring myself to face you with what I'd done, so I stayed away. For years. For decades. This money I leave to Ava, it isn't a gift, it's a confession. A coward's apology written in dollars I no longer deserve to keep. I must have read that last line 10 times before my vision blurred with tears. I wasn't holding a legacy, I was holding her guilt. I leaned back against the old oak desk, the floorboards cold beneath my legs. My mother had died, thinking her cousin just vanished. No one knew why they stopped talking. I grew up thinking Eleanor was some strange, rich recluse who hated family. But now it made sense. She didn't hate us, she just couldn't live with herself. Daniel found me a while later. I must have been sitting there for hours, staring at the same letter, rereading the same lines until they stopped feeling real. He knocked lightly on the open door. Ava, you okay? I wiped my face with my sleeve and gave a half laugh. Do I look okay? He hesitated at the doorway, holding 2 mugs of tea. You look like someone who's been told a lifetime of lies in one sitting. Close enough, I said softly. He handed me the tea and sat on the edge of the old chaise by the window. The fog outside was still thick, making it look like the world beyond the glass didn't exist anymore. Just the two of us, trapped in this house of ghosts and regrets. I handed him the letter silently. He read it slowly, his brow tightening. When he finished, he exhaled sharply and set it down beside him. I wondered if she'd ever tell you, he said quietly. That caught my attention. You knew? He nodded. Not everything, but enough. She told me bits and pieces near the end. Said she'd made a mistake she couldn't undo. That she was trying to make it right one last time. I looked at him confused. But you were like her family, right? Her caretaker? He cut me off, voice low. Her son. Adopted. She took me in when I was 12. The words hung in the air, heavy. My stomach twisted. You're her son? Daniel gave a humorless smile. Legally, yes. Emotionally? Depends on the day. He stared down at his hands, the knuckles rough from years of work. She disinherited me years ago. Said the money needed to go where it should have gone in the first place. I didn't understand then. I thought she'd just stopped caring. He laughed softly, that kind of laugh that's half broken. Turns out, she did care, just not in the way I expected. Something about his calmness made me ache. I just learned that my inheritance was built on someone else's shame. And yet, Daniel, the man who'd practically been her son, was sitting there, comforting me. I shook my head. You should hate me for this. You were the one here with her, helping her, taking care of her. I didn't even know she was alive until last month. He looked up, eyes steady. Ava, I don't hate you. You didn't ask for any of this. Neither did I. Eleanor made her choices, and we're just the ones left to make sense of them. I opened my mouth to argue but couldn't find the words. Instead, I just nodded. The next few days blurred together. I stayed in the mansion, wandering through rooms filled with memories that weren't mine. Daniel and I talked more about Eleanor, about her quirks, her habits, her obsessions. He told me she loved chess but hated losing so much she'd rather end the game early than admit defeat. That she once kept a raccoon as a pet. That she'd been kind but stubborn to the point of madness. Each story painted her as more human, less mythical, and somehow, that made the guilt heavier. One night, I found another box in the attic labeled Clara Ava. Inside were faded photographs of my mother as a child, standing next to a young Eleanor by the sea. They looked like sisters. At the bottom of the box was a small silver locket. I opened it carefully. Inside was a photo of my mother on one side, and me as a baby on the other. There was also a folded note tucked behind it, for the child who reminds me that love, no matter how broken, still binds. I didn't even realize I was crying until I felt Daniel's hand on my shoulder. He must have followed me upstairs after hearing the floorboards creak. She really did love you, you know, he said gently. Then why did she hide all this? I whispered. He sighed. Because sometimes loving someone means you are too ashamed to face them. She couldn't look your mom in the eye knowing what she'd done, but she thought maybe you'd forgive her. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window watching the fog roll across the cliffs, the sea glowing faintly under the moonlight. The money sat in my bank account untouched. Every dollar felt cursed, like it carried her guilt in its weight. But I couldn't deny what else it carried. Truth. The truth that families can be both cruel and kind, selfish and selfless. That love can rot when buried too long. And as much as I wanted to walk away, I couldn't. I thought about Daniel, about how he'd been left behind too. About how we were both trying to untangle a legacy neither of us asked for. The next morning, over coffee, I told him what I decided. I want to give you half. He froze mid-sip. What? The inheritance? It's not just mine. You were her son, Daniel. You deserve this more than I do. He stared at me like I'd just spoken another language. Then he laughed softly, shaking his head. Ava, no, that's not what she wanted. She wanted you to have it to fix what she broke. But it's not fair, I insisted. She hurt you too. He looked at me for a long time. Then he smiled, not out of amusement, but out of something gentler, deeper. Life's not fair, Ava. But you? You're the first person who's made me believe it can still be good. I didn't know what to say. My throat felt tight. Keep it, he said finally. Use it for something that matters. For something she'd be proud of. That's how what you make it right. And in that moment, I realized something. The inheritance wasn't about money. It was about forgiveness. About breaking the cycle of silence that had haunted this family for generations. Later that day, as we walked along the cliffside, the wind whipping through our hair, Daniel said something that stuck with me. She used to stand right here every evening. Said the ocean reminded her that guilt always comes back, no matter how far you throw it. I glanced at him. And what do you think? He looked out at the waves. I think guilt's only heavy until you share it with someone who understands. Our eyes met for a second longer than they should have. Maybe it was the wind or the grief or the strange beauty of the moment, but something shifted between us. Not love, not yet, but something fragile and real, born out of loss, forgiveness, and the quiet understanding that we were both products of Eleanor's mistakes and her hope. That night, I took one last look at the letter, the confession that had shattered and rebuilt my world in equal measure. And for the first time, I whispered into the quiet of that house, I forgive you, Eleanor. The floor didn't creak, the wind didn't howl, but for some reason, the house felt lighter, like it had been waiting years to hear those words. It's funny how something that once felt like a curse can turn into the start of everything good. When I first opened that letter, the one that told me a woman I barely remembered had left me $1,000,000, I thought it was going to ruin my life. And in a way, it did. It shattered everything I thought I knew about family, about inheritance, about who I was. But what came after, that's the part I never expected. It's been a year since Eleanor's house stopped being just hers and started becoming ours. After learning the truth about the stolen inheritance, the guilt, the confession disguised as generosity, I couldn't just walk away. At first I tried to. I returned to the city, to my tiny apartment with its flickering light bulb and perpetually leaky faucet, and pretended I could go back to normal. But the silence there was heavier than any I'd felt in that old coastal mansion. It wasn't guilt exactly. It was unfinished business. Every time I looked at my bank account, that absurd number at the top mocked me. It wasn't mine, not really. It was decades of pain, of broken ties, of love that had been buried under pride. And then one morning, I woke up before dawn, made myself a coffee, and realized I knew what I had to do. I drove back to the coast. The mansion was waiting, the white paint chipping, ivy crawling up its walls, the sea breeze whistling through cracked windows. But somehow, it still felt alive. Daniel was there, of course. He met me at the door with that quiet, knowing expression of his. "I knew you'd come back," he said. I smiled faintly. "Guess I'm not good at leaving things broken." He just nodded, stepping aside so I could walk in. The house smelled the same salt, dust, and faint traces of Eleanor's old rose perfume. But this time, it didn't feel haunted. It felt waiting. I told Daniel my plan over coffee at the kitchen table. "I want to use the money," I said. "Not for me. For this place." He frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "I want to restore it. Turn it into something new. Something alive again." He looked skeptical but curious. "Like what?" I hesitated, then smiled. "An art and community center? For kids? For people like me? People who didn't have much, but needed somewhere to create, to breathe." Daniel's eyes softened. "That's actually beautiful, Ava. I used to draw a lot," I said quietly. "Before life got in the way, before rent and bills and losing Mom. I always thought art was a luxury, but maybe it's more of a lifeline. And if Eleanor spent her life trying to atone for what she took, maybe I can use what she left to give something back." He studied me for a long moment, then smiled. "Then let's do it." And just like that, two people bound by someone else's sins started building something good. Restoring the house wasn't easy. It was expensive, exhausting, and emotionally draining. We spent months hiring local workers, carpenters, painters, electricians. The townspeople were skeptical at first. They remembered Eleanor as that strange old woman on the hill. Not exactly someone you'd name a community center after, but slowly they came around. Every time I explained what we were building, the Eleanor Whitmore Art and Learning Center, people started donating. Time, tools, even old books and furniture. And somewhere along the way, the mansion began to glow again. I remember the day the scaffolding came down. The exterior was repainted in its original soft cream color, the shutters restored, the garden replanted with roses Eleanor's favorite. The sea air was still harsh, but now the house stood proud against it, like it had found its purpose again. Inside, the rooms were transformed. The grand dining hall became a community art studio filled with easels, canvases, and shelves of supplies. The old library, once locked away, became a quiet reading room. Even Eleanor's study, the room where I discovered everything, became a small memorial. We left her desk just as it was, with her letters displayed under glass. A plaque hung above it. "For those who seek forgiveness, may creation be your redemption." The first time the children arrived, wide-eyed, curious, nervous, I almost cried. There was a girl named Mia who loved sketching animals, a boy named Rohan who painted waves that looked so real they almost moved, and a shy teen named Lila who'd never touched a paintbrush before, but had the gentlest hands when she sculpted clay. Watching them fill the halls with laughter and color was like watching the house breathe again. Daniel helped too. He ran the logistics, fixed everything that broke, which was a lot, and somehow always knew when to hand me coffee exactly when I needed it most. We grew closer in that slow, natural way that doesn't feel like a spark, but like warmth seeping into your bones. There was no dramatic confession, no movie moment, just two people who had been broken by the same story, finding comfort in rebuilding it together. One evening, we stood on the cliff as the sun dipped below the horizon. The kids had gone home, and the house behind us glowed softly through the windows, laughter still echoing faintly from earlier. Daniel handed me a small box. "What's this?" I asked. He smiled. "Something I found while cleaning out the attic." Inside was a locket. Eleanor's locket. The one with my mom's picture on one side and mine on the other. "I think it's yours now," he said. I held it in my hand, feeling the weight of it light but meaningful. "She kept this all her life," I whispered. "She did," he said softly, "and now it's where it belongs." For a long moment, we just stood there, the wind wrapping around us, the sea roaring below. "She'd be proud of you, he said quietly. I smiled faintly. "Maybe. Or maybe she'd think I'm crazy for giving away the money." He chuckled. "Maybe, but I think she'd be proud anyway." The grand opening came a few weeks later. The town gathered, curious and excited. The mayor gave a short speech. Kids showed off their paintings, and for the first time in decades, the Whitmore estate wasn't a place of whispers and secrets, it was alive with joy. When it was my turn to speak, I stood at the front steps, the ocean breeze tugging at my hair, and said the only thing that felt true. This place isn't about money. It's about legacy, not the kind you inherit, but the kind you build. Eleanor Whitmore wasn't perfect. None of us are, but she believed that even the worst mistakes can be turned into something beautiful. I hope this house proves her right. Applause rippled through the crowd, but what I really felt was peace. For the first time since that letter arrived in my mailbox, I wasn't weighed down by what I'd been given. I was finally using it for something good. Months passed. The center thrived. Kids came from nearby towns, volunteers taught free classes, and every wall filled with paintings that told stories of hope, pain, love, and growth. I moved permanently to the coastal town. My little apartment in the city was gone, replaced by mornings spent by the sea and evenings where Daniel and I sat on the porch, drinking tea and watching the sun melt into the water. He'd tease me sometimes about how I'd turned a millionaire inheritance into a non-profit. And I'd just grin and say, best investment I ever made. Sometimes, when I walk through the halls at night after everyone's gone, I swear I can still feel Eleanor's presence. Not haunting, just watching, proud maybe. I stop by her old study where her letters rest in their glass case and I whisper, you did it. We did it, because it's true. That money didn't buy me happiness, it didn't fix everything, but it gave me the chance to rewrite the story, hers, mine, and everyone else's who walks through those doors. Now, when I think about inheritance, I don't think of bank accounts or property deeds. I think of the sound of paintbrushes scratching across canvas. I think of laughter echoing through rooms that were once silent. I think of forgiveness not as an act, but as a creation. And I think of Eleanor, not as the woman who stole, but as the woman who tried in the only way she knew how to give something back. So yeah, that letter changed my life. But not because it made me rich, because it made me whole, because it turned guilt into grace. Because it taught me that inheritance isn't about what you get, it's about what you do with what's left behind. And maybe most importantly, because it gave me the courage to love again, not just Eleanor or Daniel or this town, but the version of myself that finally stopped running. That letter didn't just change my life, it repaired someone else's too, even if she wasn't around to see it. Alright, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the story. We have so many more amazing stories coming your way, so make sure you hit that subscribe button. Our goal is to reach 100K subscribers by the end of this year, and we'd love for you to be part of this journey. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.